Okay, we're going to wrap up working on the head by doing the hair, an important part of the head. So, understanding that hair and fur, and despite like where you might have hair on your body, it's all basically the same stuff. In fact, our hair and things like nails and like horns on something like a rhino are made of similar materials. So, like a hoof on a horse. If you really look at like your nails, you'll see like the different fibers in it if you really pay attention to it. There's a couple of kind of hardish things that our bodies can make, things like enamel as well as things like tusks or whatever are made out of like our teeth are made of enamel. Our bones are made out of calcium. They have to stay inside of our body. When exposed, they become really brittle. But anything like claws and the hair things on our head and fur, all of it is made out of similar materials. And in fact, if you look up it closely to it, it has an interesting ridge structure because it has to grow out. It sort of builds up almost like a plant or a flower might. And so on this lion, we have the hairy mane here, but we also have the fur that's on the rest of the lion's skin and the hair that's on its tail. And it's all made out of relatively the same stuff. And no matter where someone's from or what their pigmentation is or what their hair texture is like, it's all relatively the same structure. It is a single strand that comes out of a follicle that is rooted into somewhere into your skin, whether it's on your scalp or hair that's on your body. So it all functions basically the same way. Hair has a lot of functions. Some hairs, like whiskers and things, can indicate where danger is or help like small cats like know what spaces they can navigate into. It's why cats and mice and things like that have whiskers, because they can sense whether or not they can fit into a small opening. In a lot of animals like bears, not only does a hair keep them warm, it provides a type of armor because the follicles themselves, much like plants, help a side of a sandy dune from eroding. It sort of toughens up and helps their skin stay thick and tough to the elements. So why is it so complex? In fact, when we're working with hair in video games especially, hair is these days often more polygons than the rest of the whole body combined. If you look at the base mesh geometry from like a PlayStation 3 to a PlayStation 4 game, the topology hasn't changed that much, but the hair has dramatically increased. And this is also one of the reasons that hair is starting to look a lot better in games, is because as we get more budgets for more pixels, we've been throwing that into hair. I've heard some people say like, well, they don't care about hair. Why do they put so much effort into it? It's complicated and it's very difficult to do, and it's very processor intensive because we have to simulate lots of tiny little follicles. In fact, the way hair is done in modern AAA is similar to how we did the trees, where we used alpha channels, where they build all of these hundreds of cards, as they call them, out, and then they would texture them with alpha channel textures of fibers of hair coming together to try to mesh it up. But of course, if you look closely, you can see this isn't single strands of hair. These are clumps made up of little shelves like that. And so hair is like, there's thousands of hairs on your head, and it's not possible that a computer to simulate all of them, which is what makes it so complex. Of course, hair comes in lots of different styles. Here's a couple of old style guides, and if you're looking for them, you can find some yourself. I would recommend, when you're doing your characters, try to identify real-life haircuts that are similar to what your characters are trying to do. You're going to base your concept art as your core thing, but it's just ways we can help understand. Now, one of the first things to break down when understanding our hair is the overall shape. No matter what your texture of hair is, your shape is really important, and thinking about the overall strands is also a really crucial step. So this is a good example from Vidal Sassoon hair cutting guide, in which we can see, depending on the kind of cut of the hair, there's different geometry, that our hair isn't equally length on all of our heads. In fact, most of the time it's not. In a traditional men's haircut, for instance, there's more length on the top and it tapers down into the sides and back into the neck. Similar, like an extreme example of that is this young guy's fade over here, where the hair is allowed to be longer up here and then it tapers down into, well, something that's barely even there. Again, a proper fade. And in hair, when we're cutting even for longer hair, there's lots of different lengths and cuts that can be done to create different layering effects. And trying to understand, when we're looking at the characters we're recreating, and trying to understand where's the hair longest and where's the hair shortest, is going to be helpful in recreating the style we're looking for. Of course, another thing to consider with hair is its part. So the structure of hair, it will have in most cases, depending on your hairstyle. So for instance, this girl's hair is brought into groups or bunches and it's tied up with these little bands, and so we can see the scalp underneath because it's exactly what our head is. It's scalp, and then the hair is on top of it. This guy, the Korean actor, I believe, we see a part, a very traditional sort of gentleman's left part, and then this woman's mid part right here. So our hair comes from the bottom and it comes up and out. One thing to note is that hair, because of the nature of it, it's a follicle, doesn't lay flat on the scalp. It wants to come up and over and out, up and over and out. And even here, on fairly fine hair, up and over and out. It shoots out with a sort of a root, which gives it a little bit of structure. So it never lays completely flat on the head. We need to give it a little loft, and that's what gives our heads that little bounciness to it. Of course, depending on the person, our hair can vary dramatically in thickness. For instance, this woman's hairstyle is very natural and it has a real curliness to it, and it's got a real thickness, and we can see it in the way that it captures the sunlight. Trying to do every individual one of these fibers would be really, really complicated for a computer to do, so we have to figure out how to simulate and simplify. Working our way down, this gentleman here, we can see his beard and facial hair as well as eyebrows is a little thicker, so maybe even a little thicker than mine here, and we can see that it's going to cause like waviness and branching. We can even see in the beard there's waviness already caused in his beard hair from that. Not as extreme as sort of her curliness, but then when we get down into this little girl's hair, we see the finer it gets, the less kind of curly and sort of wrapping up in itself it gets because it has less structure. So it can't hold as much of a form. So like, again, going from that extreme example of her hair her whole life, no matter how long she grows, it will always want to fall down because it's very fine and it's very thin. Whereas her hair is naturally going to want to go up and out because it's thick and strong. And that means that it's going to be able to hold more structure and naturally want to hold more structure. So, of course, there's variations. I'm sure that someone could give her a hairstyle that with enough hairspray and things like that would go up. I'm sure with enough chemical treatments, this woman could keep her hair to go down. But this is sort of what's the tendencies that are causing it. And then this guy's hair, although we can't see it under his headgear, his headwear here, there's likely a sort of a waviness that we see, sort of something in between the hair staying in one place and creating its own wave to it. Hair also has a wide range of color, but hair isn't colored. We tend to think of people as like you have brown hair, you have black hair, you have blonde hair, you have gray hair, but it's actually a whole spectrum. And much like melanin in the skin creates our different skin tones, melanin in our hair creates the exact same effect. So example, this is a young boy who has albinism, which means that he has no pigmentation. And so you see he's purely white hair, he's going to have pink in his eyes, and he's going to have very pale white skin because of low overall pigmentation. These two gentlemen over here, we can see, although at one time likely had hair that was not white or silver in this case, as they age, they've lost pigmentation in their hair, which has caused it to go closer to white and gray. Moving up in pigmentation, we have like a really sunny, very bright golden sort of blonde, moving into what we call a strawberry blonde. That's someone who's somewhere in between reddish hair and blondish hair. Rupert Grint over here, from Harry Potter, is a classic redhead. And of course, the term redhead was originated because at the time they named that redhead. We didn't have in the language, in the English language, a word for red. It was not used frequently enough. We didn't have the word orange. So red was the color. They didn't make a distinction between what we'd call orange and what they called red. It was all part of red. The same way there's many shades of blue, and we all call them blue. So that's why the term redhead, because orange, the word orange literally hadn't been invented yet. We get sort of an amber colored hair here. This woman has, this is where you see your most reddishness as it's transitioning from sort of the orange look that we have here of a pure redhead, and we're transitioning into the brownish hairs is where you get that real redness in it. So the redness is kind of right in the middle of that spectrum between blonde and brown hair. And then we get into a chestnut hair, into a true blue, brown hair, This is a sort of a light brown hair into a true brown hair, into darker brown hair, darker still brown hair. And you might look at this and say, well, this is sort of black, isn't it? But if you look closely, you can see the highlights aren't quite white. They still have some brownishness to it. So her hair isn't really black. It's not truly raven. However, as we get further into the melanin spectrum, we see purely jet black hair in these two women at the end. And so we can tell from melanin less to melanin more, it's all in a wide spectrum of different hair color. Of course, hair color can be changed. So hair dyes are nothing new, and people like to dye their hair today to make statements or express themselves, or just like they would change clothes. But it actually goes really far back into ancient history. The Romans were known to dye their hair jet black with lots of combinations of different chemicals. And here's a picture of an ancient from the British Isles, a Pict or Celtic warrior were known to use natural ingredients to actually bleach their hair stark white to try to make themselves look more fearsome. There was a story too of Romans who came across a tribe that dyed their hair a blue. They would put like blue dye in their beards. And so there's lots of things that can be done, but our hair naturally is going to follow into this melanin curve unless we add some extra coloring or dye or component to it, which then you can get a whole host of incredible colors. So when we're trying to come up with hairstyles for computer graphics, we want to think about like, where do we fall on the spectrum? Because as I mentioned, hair can be incredibly time consuming, placing all those cards by hand or placing all those elements by hand. I'm going to be showing you a technique that I think is going to get good results relatively quickly. But we have everything from the sort of Lego person hair of the Nintendo Mii's to something ultra realistic like Ellie from The Last of Us. This is a great character design from Valley of the Gods, showing like a really fun compromise between the two, where it's combining some of the geometry hair techniques, which are just going to be built using traditional modeling, with some of these alpha channel techniques that you'd see on an ultra realistic character to create something stylized, but still has a realistic feel and a really interesting hairstyle. And so there's lots of things that can be done. And in fact, hair is really cool to me in computer graphics because it's only recently been getting a lot of attention as our computers have been getting powerful enough to really simulate it. What's on the horizon, especially for games, is being able to do real-time, real hair simulation, which is incredible, but it still requires a lot of hardware, so we're a bit off from it. So in the next video, I'll show you some of the ways we can make hair, and then I'll make hair on a character.